I've done a few videos on FNAF fan games, and I always ask you guys what fan games you want me to talk about. I always expect the typical requests, like The Joy of Creation, Popgoes, maybe Five Nights at Wario's. What I didn't expect was for people to never shut up about Dayshift at Freddy's. Even on my video called The Best FNAF Fan Game, I saw one of four things. People agreeing with me, people saying The Joy of Creation was the best, people saying Flumpty's 2 or 3 was the best, or Dayshift at Freddy's 3 was the best. Don't get me wrong, I love these games. I actually hadn't played Dayshift 3 prior to all those comments, because I assumed it wouldn't be all that different from the first two. I think these games are really entertaining, and I have a load of fun with the ridiculousness of it, but I never would have expected people to be saying that one of them is the best FNAF fan game. Today I'm going to be doing a retrospective like I did with the Flumpty's trilogy, but I don't really want to break it down game by game like I did that way. I think 3 deserves the most attention because you guys were right, it's the best one for sure, but I'd rather just talk about the series as a whole and explain why I do enjoy it, and why it sort of stuck around for so long. The main reason Dayshift at Freddy's is so famous is that it's outrageously funny.
Hello there, old sport.
I love basically everything about the comedy of these games. The robotic voices are just so great, and the lack of expression makes everything they say sound so weird in the best way possible. I'm obviously mainly talking about Dave, this game's purple guy. Dave is one of my favorite characters in any FNAF fan game. This character actually stays true to the source material for the most part, but the way the developers rewrote this character is fantastic. He's just a big dope. He says weird things that have become very iconic in the greater FNAF space.
I'm not happy. Maybe it's because we're still here and not partying it up in Vegas right now.
He's also the most crude for sure, and yeah, that's arguably cheap comedy, but it definitely works. I'd say Dayshift at Freddy's 1 and 2 are equally funny, but 3 isn't quite as funny. 3 still has plenty of funny moments, but this being the end of the trilogy, it clearly tried to focus more on a quality, conclusive story. It's fairly emotional and surprisingly well written, but I'll save that for a different segment. This series manages to utilize absurdity in the best way possible, with its images, text, even its mechanics. Basically all the humans are stock photos and they look so dumb, but that's why I love it. The animatronics, especially in Dayshift 2, just look so goddamn funny. Toy Freddy is probably my favorite. He's just so cute, but he's so sad. It's weirdly entertaining.
Who are
I'm the
you?
Plastic bear.
Okay.
Nobody likes the plastic bear.
Okay. Why don't
Because
people
I'm
like you?
obese and plastic.
Mm.
Those two traits make me worse than Balloon Boy and Fredbear, who each only have one of those two qualities.
Uh-huh.
This game is also famous, or maybe infamous, for the Yif the Fox joke. I hate it, but I also love it.
What was that again?
Get the fucking fox.
I don't want to. I don't wanna.
Hair.
I'm a Yif the Fox, I guess. I'm still not showing this.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yes. Oh yeah. Harder father. Oh yeah. Oh yes. Spank me harder daddy. Oh yes.
And who can forget the classic moment at the Grand Canyon?
Pick up the facts. 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 Grand Canyon, 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 Grand Canyon.
I also love this version of Phone Guy. They actually managed to make him a pretty depressing character in the third game, but in the first two, it's just amazing. He's a guy with a fucking phone for a head. It's it's great. I could talk about this forever because they just pack a million jokes into every second of every game. I don't think there will ever be a Dayshift 4, I don't really want there to be, but I don't think there will ever be a fan game that manages to top this series' humor, so that is definitely something I will miss. Now I'd like to talk about the game's actual writing, and again I mainly just want to talk about Dayshift 3, because it honestly did everything perfectly in terms of story. Every game comes full circle, and every game matters, but Dayshift at Freddy's 3 was the one to focus on the story more than anything, and it was the one to conclude the story. Dayshift at Freddy's 3 tied the story together beautifully. I didn't even really know how much of a narrative this series had. In fact, it's so much more detailed than I thought that I might miss some stuff, so if there's anything you want to add in the comments, go for it, because I likely won't get to everything. The main thing I would like to talk about is the characters and how they develop and how they relate to each other. Jack, the protagonist, and Dee, a murder victim of Dave and Henry's, have a shockingly amazing narrative together. We see Dee for the first time in the second game when Jack helps them be set free in one of the endings, but they develop most in Dayshift 3. We find out that Dee, who is represented by the puppet, was Jack's sister, and Dave didn't know that when he and Henry killed her. Something I should say is that most of the story of the third game takes place in the flip side, which is, as far as I'm aware, where Lost Souls are. Most of the main characters are in the flip side because they have died but not fully moved on. This includes Dave, but only a part of him. Dave's peaceful side is who we see in the flip side, but the vengeful side of him is still in the real world as Dave Trap. I will try to make this make more sense over time, but hopefully you get it. Anyway, when Jack enters the flip side and then sees Dee, the conversation that we endure is actually pretty touching. Dee sees Jack with Dave and that immediately causes her to distrust him, but when that altercation ends, since this is the good version of Dave, Jack explains that he's here to help and he and Dee actually share a moment. It's a really interesting scenario that, honestly, actual FNAF should have done before, but just never did. The only time the real series has ever actually come close to this, I would say, is the ending of FNAF 6. And, you know, since they introduced voice acting, you know, technically with Phone Guy, but especially in Sister Location, I think the emotion of these characters could have been developed so much further, and Dayshift Freddy's 3 actually did it really well. Dee confronts the two about how they stole the lives of innocent children, and how they'll never be able to grow up or see their family again. Once again, this deep and emotional side of the story is something I actually would have loved to see in the main FNAF story. Hearing about the pain this soul has gone through, and having a peaceful version of the antagonist hear it as well, is a really great plot device. Dave was also made into an even better character with this idea of being two separate entities. We got to see him as an actual peaceful soul, so we didn't have to feel bad for falling in love with this murderer. I love this man. I would do anything for this man.
This is a homicidal maniac. No, you may not date him.
Unless you don't take this path, the general plot of this game is freeing all of the lost souls. These being Dee, Dave, the original phone guy named Steven, Peter, Jack's brother, and Jack's lost soul. Jack's body and soul are separate. No, I don't know why. And yes, Jack's soul is represented with a dog. I can't explain this. I can't. This game is just a perfect conclusion for the story. It sacrifices some of its humor to actually open up an emotional side of the story, and it gives every character an ending that I think we can all appreciate. In order to free all the souls, you have to defeat Henry, who is basically the evil mastermind of this all. Dave is as well, of course, but there's the whole distinction between the peaceful and vengeful version of him. Once every soul in the flip side is freed by defeating the final boss, Jack goes back to his restaurant in the real world, where Dave Trap brings every old broken animatronic. In order to achieve this ending, what you have to do is turn down Dave's offer to work with him, which is something that comes on very early in the game. So when you return to your restaurant after the moments in the flip side, Dave comes back with every broken animatronic as his army. But similar to FNAF 6, that's what Jack wanted to happen. He burns the place down with Dave himself and all these souls in the building.
Clever. Very clever. Gathering us all here? What? There's just one error in your plan, old sport. There's no way out. Or anyone. If you strike a match, you're gonna burn with the rest of us.
Like FNAF 6, this ending was just perfect for the series. It's a send-off for every character, and as ridiculous as they all are, it's a really nice conclusion for these characters that people have loved for many years. There are other endings, but that is obviously the one I love the most. However, as I briefly mentioned, there is also a path where you don't help Dee and don't free the souls, and instead you go down the evil path with Dave Trap in the real world. This one is really interesting and really heartbreaking because you get confronted by Dee and Dave because you went behind their back. You can avoid going in the flip side and then just carry on doing what you want to do with Dave in the real world, but you actually have the option to go into the flip side, agree to help Dee and Dave free the souls, and then help Dave in the real world. And they find out, and then you have to kill them. It's so heartbreaking. Again, it does what the main FNAF series should have done a little bit more, actually, because you are confronted with the consequences of your actions. And it's genuinely really emotional. You tell these people that they can trust you, and then you go behind their back, and they confront you for it. And once you take out Dee, who, reminder, is Jack's sister, Dave sacrifices himself, not wanting to fight anymore, and just sort of gives Jack a fucking mental beating about how he is the worst thing ever for doing what he's done. And you know it's true. That's the thing. You know it's true, and you chose this path. It's so well done. It's so well written. And just sort of going back to the original ending about freeing all the souls, it actually gives off a message that I personally really like about the ending of this game. See, the thing about freeing all these souls is basically every soul you're freeing isn't a great person. Dave was a murderer, and Jack helped him murder, and phone guy as well, Steven, was, like, completely terrible towards his employees, to the point of where he would frame them for murder. But it is still your job to convince them to let you help them, and then you set their souls free as the end of the game. Its general message is about forgiveness and letting go, and that's something I can really get behind. Now, in the case of child murderers, I'm not saying we should forgive them, but I think the idea of allowing your soul to rest and be at peace despite the mistakes of your past is a really nice final message. What I'm covering is only the surface of this story, as you can tell if you know anything about this series, but I can't talk about everything in one video. In fact, maybe at some point I will replay all 3 games in my own time. I already played through I played through a lot of it just to refresh my memory to write this one, but in order to 100% all those games, it would take so many hours. So maybe one day I will go through it once more, maybe take some notes for myself, and then do a full video specifically about the story, because I definitely think that would be worth it. Let me know if that is something you would like. This series has a narrative with a bunch of characters, and despite basically being a big shitpost, the characters are so well developed, and are some of the most memorable characters in any FNAF fan game. I legitimately love all of them, and I think they will be iconic for as long as the FNAF community is around. Something that's also pretty much exclusive to Dayshift 3 is gameplay. The first 2 have minigames, but they're basically comedic visual novels from top to bottom. Dayshift 3, on the other hand, features some RPG mechanics in the flip side. I wish it was used a little more, and it's not perfect, but I really like turn-based RPGs, and this one is pretty solid. Every character has different abilities, and you unlock new abilities as you level up, and you unlock new characters as you interact with them as the story progresses. And the final boss of this game, which as I mentioned earlier is Henry, is actually somewhat challenging, and although I did beat it on my first try, it still feels rewarding and makes for a good final encounter. Once again, I just kind of wish it was used more, but I suppose there really isn't a way to utilize this type of gameplay outside of the flip side. Now I would like to talk about each game individually before I wrap up this video, but I'm not going to spend too much time on it like I did with Flumpties, because as I said at the beginning, this trilogy is best when talking about it as a whole. Dayshift was a very solid start to this series, and is probably still the most iconic one to this day. I think its version of Dave is the funniest, it has some of the most entertaining moments and endings, it's just a great ride of laughs. There's nothing really else to it besides its comedy, but I honestly like 1 more than 2, because it's really funny. Dayshift at Freddy's 2 is still funny, and I'd say it has more narrative than Dayshift 1, and don't get me wrong, it's very well made, but its narrative isn't engaging enough to overtake the amazing humor of Dayshift 1 for me. It has my favorite animatronics of the series though. Toy Chica and Toy Freddy are pretty fucking funny, and definitely have some iconic jokes. But Dayshift 1, although it may not be as complex necessarily, it's just funnier and I find that more fun. However, Dayshift at Freddy's 3 is definitely the best of the series. It's still the least funny, but unlike Dayshift 2, I think it makes up for the lack of comedy in fantastic ways. It has a great narrative, a wonderful ending, some pretty solid gameplay, and it's just a gem altogether, because it is still funny. I think all the games are fun, they're all good in their own way, but if I were to rank them from best to worst, it'd have to be 3, 1, then 2. That's all I really have to say about Dayshift at Freddy's. I really love these games, and I think they really stand out. The way the developer gave original personalities to the characters, and the use of humor and drama in this story is just something that really stands out and stays in your mind. There have been plenty of funny FNAF fan games, and plenty of fan games with good story, but Dayshift at Freddy's just did everything so well. I can't fully understand why some would call Dayshift 3 the best FNAF fan game, or why the Dayshift at Freddy's trilogy is the best fan game trilogy, but I do think it's something special. The thing about FNAF fan games is there's a lot of good ones. The community is very dedicated, and that's obviously why it's still so strong. But I would say there's a lot more good FNAF fan games than there are different and unique FNAF fan games. A lot of fan games just do a bit of a reimagining of one of the official FNAF games. And I'd say most of the free roam ones just try to level with the joy of creation. And that's okay, I have no problem with that, but I definitely have more fun talking about the ones that branch out more. I think the way Candy's 3 creates an original story and manages to utilize the FNAF formula in its own way is great. I had a lot of good things to say about Grizzlies because I really appreciated how experimental it was with its cutscenes and stuff like that. Bonnie Simulator, although it hasn't aged that great, was really cool when it came out because it managed to be its own thing. Dayshift at Freddy's isn't in the top tier of fan games in my opinion, but it's very memorable because it's different. I love it because it's funny and intriguing, but I also really respect it because of how much it tried. That's going to be all from me. Please hit like and subscribe if you did enjoy this, it helps out a lot. And you can also follow me on Twitter and Instagram with the links down below if you just want to stay updated with what I'm doing or to hear my really bad jokes. Thank you for watching the Dayshift at Freddy's retrospective.